I'm a recovering codependent. A little quick about me. I'm going to share a lot of my story as I go through this workshop, just a brief one. I came into recovery in 2008, so I've got 16 years in recovery. I came in through the S Fellowship, so I came in as a sex addict, also a raging alcoholic. I had a wonderful therapist that realized about 9 months into my recovery that I'm a flaming codependent. So she had me start going to CoDA meetings, and her and I were working on my codependency issues as well. At the same time, my husband, right there, Fabio, we've been together 30 years. We started going to RCA, which is Recovering Couples Anonymous. And as of yesterday, I celebrated 15 years in CoDA. Fabio celebrated 8 years in CoDA, and he and I celebrated 15 years in RCA. So love my recovery. Bullying. Why the heck did I pick this topic? My motivation behind this is that I thought I was the only person in the whole world. Same story, right? I'm the only one. I come into recovery. It's the first thing I heard, right? I'm the only one. Nobody can understand. The amount of bullying that I suffered as a child was so immense that nobody could possibly understand. And of course, any of us that have experienced severe abuse and trauma comes shame. And shame says, I don't speak. I hide. I'm invisible, right? It's too painful. Plus, if I share with other people, how is that going to be used? So when I came into recovery, I started hearing other men and women share their bully stories. I'm like, oh, I'm not the only one that was bullied on, on the schoolyard and so forth. And then I also realized there were all these other forms of bullying. I didn't realize my father was bullied so much for being overweight. And it had the same impact on it as the gay bullying had on me. Yeah, just in case you can tell, I'm gay. And that was the huge thing for me, was the gay bullying. So, as said, a lot of my story is going to come out as I go through this presentation. I know I'm going to try to whip some things up. How I wanted to do this is we're going to have 3 exercises that you're going to be doing. One thing I'll talk about is what is bullying, right? I have to understand what it is, what the various forms of bullying are. And I want to be gentle on this because I know for me, it brings up a lot, right? And I can imagine I'm not the only one in this room that's suffered any form of bullying. And bullying is much more than we think about. It's not just what happens on the schoolyard. Understanding what the impact of bullying is on me, on my emotional health, and the codependent traits that come from that. And then ultimately, where I like to spend most of the time is, which is in the solution, right? How do I overcome the effects of bullying and put that bully back in its place? Because it was never mine to begin with, right? That's the part. It's never mine. Give the responsibility back to the perpetrator. So what is bullying? Bullying is the repetitive, intentional hurting of one person or group by another person or group where the relationship involves an imbalance of power. So that's important. And all forms of abuse that we're talking about that are about bullying are about an imbalance of power over another person. One of the terms that I've really liked that speaks so much to me when we talk about bullying is this term called interpersonal cruelty. I mean, that just really sums it up quickly, because it is. Talk about different types of bullying. This is kind of the unpleasant part. There's the physical bullying, the beating, the hitting, the kicking, the shoving, stealing people's property, spitting, all of that. My bullying started early on, so I got to give a little bit of a background story. My biological mother abandoned me when I was 4, and I suffered a lot of physical and emotional abuse from her. And one of the abuses I suffered from her was deprivation, obsessive deprivation. She would confine me in a closet for days. She was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and she'd go out prostituting to make money and continue that. And then she would come home, and of course, little boys in the closet, I believe myself, and I would get beat for that. So it was pretty bad. What that meant is that for the 4 years of my life, I was extremely intellectually underdeveloped and emotionally underdeveloped and physically underdeveloped. So at 4, she physically left me and went to Canada and left me in a house to die. Neighbors saw this naked little boy in a window, and the police had to break down the door. I entered the world of CPS, and I ended up going into a child's rehabilitation hospital, and that's where I would meet my future mother. She was my primary therapist. At that time, this was 1970, 69, 1970. I'm that old. 18 months, I'll be 60. I'm an old man. At that time, they didn't understand trauma and the impact on development so well as they do today. So they wanted to give me this label of EMR, which is educable mental retardation. My mom didn't believe that. She said, no, if I was confined in the closet and had all these abuses, of course I would be underdeveloped. So she fought that and won. So what my diagnosis was, it was autism and Asperger's specifically at that time, but it would be autism spectrum disorder today. So that was the first thing. I was different. I was underdeveloped. English is not my first language. So the first thing kids between the ages of 4 and 6 are really alert to differences in people. That's when they start becoming hyper alert to differences. And of course, in their own family of origins, how is that treated, differences? So the first thing kids notice is I was weird. So I was the weird kid. I spoke funny. I acted funny. I also didn't have the skills that I learned in cognitive behavioral therapy around how to handle when I was overstimulated. You know, I wasn't like the guy on Typical that had those nice little headphones. I wish I had those in school to block out a lot of the noise. I'd be one of those kids that would stand up in the middle of the room when I was overstimulated and try to stim, but nobody understood. So I was a weirdo. So that was the first thing that happened. And then by the second grade, they started noticing something else about me. I heard words like homosexual, faggot, queer, getting out in here, the J word. That one never bothered me. And I started hearing those words as a second grader. Second grader doesn't understand human sexuality. And that got pretty bad. And then the verbal abuse, the insulting, the teasing, the name calling, harassment, mean comments, humiliating, threatening, you know, on the schoolyard, you know, having kids threatening you every day. Boys and girls. I was raised in Montana, and the girls were just as mean as the boys. So I'm not one of those that had, you know, girlfriends that supported me. The boys and the girls my age were just as wicked. So that was tough. Moving on to social bullying, which is a form of verbal bullying. And these include behaviors like lying, spreading rumors, gossiping, whether it's true or not. And the motivation there is to create this negative image and destroy reputation, discourage others to exclude, marginalize, whether it's racial or identity, bullying, mimicking someone negatively, and playing mean jokes. That gossiping was a huge thing. You know, people were making up stories about me, and then as a second grader, whether I was going to be here or not really didn't matter. But they were creating this image and to destroy it. Like I'd meet a new kid, and of course they'd rely on gossip, and I would lose a potential friend. So I really struggled with making friends as a child, not only because of the autism, but because of what people were saying. And back in Montana at that time, I lived in this town of Montana, probably the whitest city in, you know, probably the whole world at that time. It was crazy and a little redneck. So I really stuck out. Then there's cyberbullying. That didn't exist when I was a kid. So I personally haven't suffered that, but it's good to bring this up because younger people do. And this is online bullying. And the channels this happens is emails, cell phones, text messages, internet sites, social media, Facebook, X, things like that, school posts, things, so forth. And these behaviors will include sexual remarks, online rumors, mean comments, name calling, harassment, stalking. The challenge about this is very often it's done anonymously. People create fake screen names and then attack. So that's a pretty hard one. And it's considered probably the most pervasive form of bullying today. And it's really the only one that they can monitor and measure with any degree, which we'll be talking about statistics here in a moment. All right, that did not come out very late, right? One paper cut is okay, but I keep getting more and more paper cuts. Eventually, the accumulation, it's too much, and that is abusive. So the definition that I have here for it is a common interaction that subtly, often unconsciously, and unintentionally expresses a prejudiced attitude toward a member of a marginalized group. An unconscious bias influenced by how we behave towards others. And what is bias? Bias is the disproportionate weight in favor or against an idea, person, or thing used in a way that is inaccurate, closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. And there are three, oh, that really doesn't show up well. Sorry about that. There are three basic forms of microaggressions. The first group are what's called the inferiority. And this is being interrupted, being talked over, and language. So one thing I heard a lot growing up is, oh, you speak so much, you speak such good English, or you're so articulate. I would hear that, especially as a kid. Or another one is, you got that all wrong. What you meant to say was this. Somebody putting words in my mouth, right? And that is a form of that type of microaggression. Then there's the invisibility. This is where ideas are not recognized, comments, inputs are dismissed. I could be in a meeting, I give an idea to the group, and crickets, or they just move on, no acknowledgement. And a little bit later, somebody else comes up with the idea and make it the correct. Anybody have that happen before? That's invisibility. That is a microaggression. It hurts. It happens enough time, people get an attitude, why bother? Then the last one, and this is a painful one, is disrespect, showing rude behavior, insulting. I get it. Women aren't good at math. They should see the field I'm in. I'm a data scientist. My boss is a female. She can do math around anybody. So I know better. But you hear things like that. You should act more masculine or feminine. Oh, I heard that growing up. Want to talk about domestic abuse and violence. That's the far end of the bullying. That is a form of bullying. So this is patterns of abuse behaviors used by one person to maintain power and control over another person in intimate relationship. It's the same as bully, right? It's power over, it's just the dynamic of an intimate relationship. Domestic abuse, violence can happen to anyone, irrespective of gender, age, sexual orientation, ethnicity, economic background. It doesn't matter, it happens. Let's talk about the difference between abuse and violence. For the abuse, this is how we treat one another. And this will include behaviors like name calling, insulting, continuously criticizing, not trusting a person, acting in a jealous or possessive manner, forcing a person to isolate from family or friends, monitoring person's whereabouts, contact with others, controlling finances or refusing to share money, punishing by withholding affection, forbidding attendance to school or employment. I got a comment here about this, undermining a person's sense of self-worth, but all forms of bullying do that, right? And then the next one is violence. This is about domestic assault. And this is where there is direct physical act. And this includes things like you're kicking, you're striking, punching, throwing, and so forth, forcing or manipulating a person into having sex, destroying pets' property, abandoning a person in dangerous or unfamiliar places, threatening physical harm to self, partner, or children. So that's on that spectrum. Now let's talk about the motivation of the bully. Why does the bully bully? Some of the motivations are power, to influence others, whether it's because they feel weak or powerless, or whether they feel falsely empowered, right? One of those codependent personality traits. Control, having control over others perceived as slower or with low self-esteem. Revenge, to retaliate after perceiving a slight or a wrong. Envy, something that someone else has, coupled with feelings of inferiority. Popularity, to belong, receive approval, or be accepted by others. Peer pressure, due to the need to conform to a group. I experienced all those, witnessed all those in me growing up. And then we have delusional justification because others are different, weak, unpopular, nervous, low self-esteem, depressed. Quiet permission. This was a huge one that I saw in my school system. Due to behavior being allowed by parents, schools, and bystanders. Nobody protected me. My parents turned an eye. The school, I had things happening in classrooms and teachers never stood up or did anything. Because there was something, obviously, it was my problem. And I would be told things like, oh, just man up. Oh, it's no big deal. Oh, they're just being funny. Bullshit. Masking. Sorry. Masking. This is a big one. Hiding insecurity, self-doubt, low self-esteem, coupled with trying to present as, right, being smart, confident, tough, secure, all those things. And then pain and trauma. Very often the bully experienced abuse himself or he witnessed abuse. All right, signs of being bullied. Unexplained injuries. Now I come home with black eyes. Didn't say anything, right? I'd run to my room. Missing personal property or having damaged property. Changing in eating habits. For me, it was eating more. I learned that also from my dad. I'd overeat. If I ate to the point where it hurt, then other things didn't hurt. Difficulty sleeping, nightmares, grade suffering. I was the opposite. I became an overachiever. I thought if I do better, people would leave me alone. So I was the straight A student, the honor student. Didn't matter. Decrease in self-esteem, isolating, self-destructive behaviors. I started cutting probably in middle school, and I was a cutter all the way up until I got into how old? I was still with Fabio, so I was probably in my mid-30s before I stopped cutting. And a lot of the cutting was because I, at that point, was afraid I didn't feel. I wasn't human. And it was a way for me to feel pain. And it was also just repeating abuse. Depression and atypical bursts of anger and aggression. And we'll be talking about anger. Lovely subject. So some problem about statistics, whether we look at the CDC, whether we look at the National Council on Education, whether we look at the stopbullying.gov, all these sites that have all these wonderful statistics on bullying, the problem is, and I like the statistic, I don't know where they got it, they say only 20% are reported. How do they know that? But that means there's a lot of people getting bullied. And to me, it doesn't matter because one bully is too much. The generation of bullying occurred. So I'm Gen X. So back in my day, there was no record of that. They wouldn't consider it bullying. They were just being kids. Today, it's a different environment. People are more hypersensitive about that. Schools kind of have to keep tracks about that. They have something now called counselors at school. We didn't have a counselor in my school growing up. Are you kidding? Rural city, can't say that word. Rural city, suburban, incident reporting. So I was in a more rural area, and we do know that statistically, per capita, bullying happens at a higher frequency in a rural environment because it's usually a more homogenized society. Any difference perceived is attacked. Whereas in a city, generally there's more diversity. Yes, bullying occurs, but the same. And the last one, cyberbullying, how the heck is that being reported? Certain, social media sites, they can have their AI intelligence construct things and determine what they think it is. But there are so many more platforms out there. But ultimately, to me, it doesn't matter what the stats are, it's too much. One is too many. All right, let's talk about some of the top characteristics for why people get bullied. And I'm not going to give percentages, but generally what all the data shows is the first thing is race, is the top one for getting bullied. And the top of that list is anybody who's biracial or has more than two races, then Black, Hispanic, and Asian. And then is the religious group, Muslim, Jewish, and Hindu. And then sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. Per capita, the transgender will be the highest, especially women, especially Black women. Transgender will be the highest per capita, if you will, of being bullied. Then gay men, lesbian not so much, but gay men. And then under gender expression, you have the tomboy, the effeminate male, and the non-binary. Tomboy probably less than an effeminate male, right? We have all these double standards, right? My mom was a class A tomboy. She probably got a little bit roused up. People got on me and they thought I was too effeminate. It didn't matter how much I tried to be that masculine dude, I just couldn't mask that way. So, yeah. And there are more other characteristics, physical attributes, people's body types. My dad was bullied for being overweight. I've seen people being bullied for being too skinny, being too white, having too curly of hair. I mean, something different, odd. It's absolutely insane. Ethnicity. This one I kind of chuckle about. I'm Russian. That's my first language. So ethnicity. Kids, back then, I don't interview they're my age. We had bomb raid in the school, right? They'd play the alarm and you'd go under your desk because the Russians were attacking. So I would hear things, "You Russian commie." That one did not bother me at all because I actually felt some kind of sense of power. They were afraid of me. So that one didn't bother me. I was smart enough to realize, oh, I have some power there. So my clique at school, we'd go around speaking Russian, and that would just absolutely freak people out. Anyway, so in a way, was I bullying back? Possibly. Intimidating, right? Economic, social status, disability, ability. Again, because of my Asperger's, that was one thing. What's wrong with you? I remember my grandparents would say, "What's his problem? Why can't he act like normal parents?" And by the way, and as I shared, my mother was a therapist. She's the one who worked with me for the first, 4 years before I was adopted. So my grandparents should have known better, right? But still, they just know how to deal with that. I wasn't like other little boys. And generally, anything that makes us different because of our family of origin, our society of origin, our religion of origin, right? Anything. It's all open for bullying. It's insane. Okay. We have an activity. Please take a paper that represents your gender identity as you were a child. All right. If we're okay on time, I do have another exercise for you guys. And in your handout, you have a section. We're going to start what's called a bully abuse inventory exercise. And we're going to do it in 3 parts. And the first part is to list abuses. You can do 1 or 2, whatever you're comfortable with. List the date range they happen. If you don't know the date range, perhaps the age, and then the description of the bully. That makes sense, something simple. If you want, I can give you 10 minutes. And if you want to share with some, you can. Talk about why. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on because I want to be mindful of time. I want to keep you hostage too long. Okay, now we're moving into the second area of the presentation, which is the impact. We've got a good understanding at a high level of what bullying is, the different forms of bullying, the spectrum of bullying. So at the top, we've got, I have to have the CoDA patterns of codependence, right? They're very, very true. So denial behaviors. And for me, the top thing, the exact nature of the wrong, is this defensiveness. I was so bullied, so beaten down, so told I was wrong, could never do anything right. I became incredibly defensive. That was probably the #1 thing I had to work on when I came into recovery, besides addiction, right? Was the defensiveness. I was constantly, even when I didn't need to defend myself, I felt like I had to defend myself. Low or damaged self-esteem. I love the term damaged self-esteem. I don't subscribe personally to low and high esteem, because we're all born with innate value, right? We all have esteem. We all are worth valuing. It's damaged. It is cut down. It is mowed, whatever you want to call it. It is damaged. I believe in having a practice on self-esteeming. It is my responsibility to work on how I value myself and my abilities. I no longer do it through other esteeming or other orienting, right? So it's a very important thing. And that meant I need to work on confidence. Control behaviors. Well, I was a victim as a child. I truly was. Well, then I became a victim as the adult. And I perpetrated from the hand of the victim, right? I would have an incident happen, and I would blow up. I actually became the perpetrator, but I was justified because I was the victim. Crazy, insane thing. And then avoidant behavior. Well, my #1 avoidant behavior is I started drinking as I was 12 years old. And then by 16, I was pretty good I was a pretty good sex addict by the age of 16, which really saddens me, right? A 16-year-old son, right? Shame-based, fear-prone, extreme anger, rage issues, PTSD, depression, anxiety, self-hatred, highly judgmental. I was judged mercilessly as a child. Again, behaviors learned. I learned to judge others harshly, right? And sadly enough, I judged other, gay men very harshly because I was judged. It was insane, absolutely insane. And of course, that means I had severe trust issues. On the other side, the long-term impacts is identity disorders and intimacy disorders. Well, codependency very much is about that, right? I have emotional immaturity. I have identity delay disorder, whatever you want to call that, sleeping disorders, eating disorders, fearful of rejection of them. I was very, very sensitive to that. I mean, when I got in a relationship with Fabio, if he said no to sex, I would have this visceral reaction. You're abandoning me. You don't love me. I'm being rejected. Absolutely insane. I understand. I shared one of my self-harming behaviors besides my addictions was I got into cutting myself. Decreased motivation, perfectionism. Oh my God, I am a class A perfectionist. I had to do a lot of work around perfectionism because I thought the better I was at things, the better that I looked, the better I did this, right? People would see this, you won't see this. What I learned is perfectionism does this to people. They can't compete with that, right? So they keep at arm's length from me. Develop obsessive compulsive personality traits. Oh God, yes. When I was first adopted, my parents and everybody would comment, I had the cleanest room in the house. My bathroom was the cleanest. I learned how to do a military role before I even knew what that was. My pencils and pens were always lined up perfectly in my desk, right? But that was the only environment where I could create a sense of safety. Moving on. I'm not going to be reading through a lot of stuff, not yet. So denial, and this is from the Codependence Anonymous manual. We acknowledge our troubled past and accept where it might have begun For many of us, this can be found in our abuse, neglect, and experience in our significant childhood relationships. We may be reluctant to call some of these experiences abuse or neglect, but we might need to recognize them as part of our personal journey. Denial of ourselves, our past or present, is often a great stumbling block in our early recovery. I love how much great information we have in all our CoDA literature that's about this topic. I was like, I thought it was so awesome. I'm in the right program. I'm not going to read through these, but we're all familiar about the denial patterns, right? And you're going to have an exercise later on where you're going to do some work with that. Denial is the maladaptive coping mechanism in which we refuse to recognize or acknowledge the objective facts or experiences. We have low self-esteem, and this is from the 12-step handbook. Upon closer examination, we were confronted with our impaired self-esteem. Were we projecting our own beliefs about ourselves onto our power, who we feared was awaiting to punish us for being so flawed? Or do we live in the omnipotent notion that we were the only ones who knew what was best for ourselves and others? Or were we both? I definitely classify as both. And then we have the patterns of low self-esteem. Low self-esteem is a lack of confidence in oneself and one's abilities. Compliance. Would somebody like to read that? We'll get Neil involved here.
I was taught manners, morals, and good behavior by my family and the society around me, including my church. The development of my own inner reality, my true self, suffered. I became other-oriented and grew up with a need to look good, to be strong, and to take care of others. Because of this orientation, I did not allow myself feeling spontaneous responses or opinions which disagreed with the authority figures in my life. A kind of death set in, an inability to engage in life at any meaningful level. I became more and more obedient, adaptive, and conforming. I learned to carefully watch the behavior of others, preparing myself to respond in a way that would be pleasing and acceptable. I was so nice and accommodating to others. Not only did I not know who I was, neither did anyone else. It's from A Door of Hope, Jimmy B.
I love these stories. And I thought, no, that got you in my too. So true. And then we have our patterns of compliance. And the compliance is usually a short-term change in public behavior, but not in private beliefs. Circumstances. Many of us take pride in controlling circumstances and those around us. If we think we might be abandoned, abused, or neglected by others, we label them as a problem and manipulate them. And then we have our control patterns. Control is the ability or perception of being able to affect oneself, others, or a situation. Another term I like for this one is the illusion of stability. Then avoidance. Avoiding people and circumstances. Some of us may fear others so much that we avoid any degree of closeness or intimacy. We work hard to prevent placing ourselves in a vulnerable position. We become skilled at hiding our fears, especially when things seem out of control. We may remain silent even when we experience injustice or abuse. And then we have the patterns of avoidance. Avoidance is a behavioral response to fear or anxiety that involves escaping or distracting oneself from uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, and situations. Oh, now we have another exercise. So I'd like you to pick a bully abuse exercise from one. I want to identify a characteristic from each of the 5 patterns of codependence that develop because of this type of abuse. So I probably should give an example, right? Might help. So what I did for myself on this one, physical beatings. It's simple, right? Physical beatings. And that happened from the 2nd grade up until the 11th grade. Under denial, I masked my pain in various ways, such as anger and isolation. It also says humor. I found no humor. I didn't use humor. Being on the spectrum, humor isn't something I do really well anyways. Low self-esteem. I do not perceive myself as lovable and worthwhile. Well, that makes sense. It was beaten out of me. Compliance, hypervigilance. That was the big thing that came out for me with that. Being hypervigilance about the feelings and behaviors of others so that I could forget and then make myself safe. Under control, I learned to use sexual attention to gain approval and acceptance. I learned at a young age it seemed to be the only thing men liked about me. I'll be talking a bit more about it on that later, but and then under avoidance, I learned to suppress my feelings. I was going to avoid vulnerability all the time. So I think that helps. Now we're going to move into our favorite topic. Not right, shame. This is an area that I had no idea that I needed so much work on when I came into recovery. I was so good at successfully avoiding my shame with alcohol and sex and some of my, wonderful bottom line codependent behaviors that I became unaware of it, but it was really ruling me inside, right? I had to do so much shame resilience and shame resilience, I can't remember the word. Work around this. So what is shame? So shame is the fear-based internal state accompanied by feelings of being unworthy and unlovable with intense feelings of mortification. That's pretty intense. That's a lot going on. The thing about shame that's so powerful is that, if I look at emotions as molecules, and I kind of like that analogy, it works for me. Shame is that one emotion that binds itself to all their emotions and completely destroys them. So for example, if I have joy, I'm happy. That shame molecule wants to fix on it, and what happens? I'm not worthy of happiness, and I sabotage my happiness. Shame is horrendous, right? It's absolutely horrendous because it binds to other emotions and it destroys the goodness. All of us are probably familiar with the emotion chart, right? Or the emotion circle. Did anybody analyze the percentage of the emotions in that beautiful multicolored diagram that are a positive emotion? Very small. Less than 25%. And depending on how complex primary, secondary, tertiary emotion scale you have, 25% or less are positive emotions. That speaks volumes, right? I'm going to move on. So because a lot of my early work in shame was around shame identity, internalized shame, internalized homophobia, I came up with a definition for myself around gay shame. And you can create your own one if you have one around body image or ethnicity or whatever. You can create your own definition. But for me, gay shame is the collective life experience around the oppression, humiliation, abuse, and invalidation of my sexual identity and orientation, which is a part of myself, but it's not all I am. But the abuse and the bully was so focused on that, that's all I could see. I was limiting myself. It's like a form of objectification. All right, shame. Shame causes us to believe we are less than, stupid, foolish, worthless, inadequate, or unwanted. It diminishes our true sense of identity and destroys our belief that we are lovable human beings. It erodes our self-esteem and sense of equality in the world. That's important. Dead on. But of course, there are types of shame, right? Different types of shame. Some people argue there's no such thing as healthy shame. There could be what's called genuine shame, which to me could just be guilt, which is dishonor, disgrace, condemnation. Then there's false shame, which is false condemnation, being accused of something that's not accurate. Secret shame, ashamed of being ashamed, right? I should be grateful. I shouldn't feel this way. This is wrong with me. Who pity me? Vicarious shame. This is way too prevalent, right? And this comes from being bullied, right? Experiencing shame on behalf of others and then carrying their shame and making it my own. It's a very, very common form of shame. And then, of course, the one that is horrific is the toxic shame, feeling of worthlessness that can develop when we internalize poor treatment from others, especially during childhood or adolescence. We learn to disassociate shame, never learning coping skills to deal with the shame. I mean, that bottle of rum doesn't work. And then, of course, in toxic shame, we disown ourselves, right? And that's codependency. We disown ourselves, right? We don't have the opportunity to learn who we are experience ourselves and develop an identity, whatever identity is. And then there are variations of shame. Oh, it gets better, right? There's all these different variations. So this is a nasty molecule. Shyness is shame in the presence of others. Discouragement is shame around temporary defeat. Embarrassment is shame in front of others. Self-conscious is shame about performance. And then the nasty one, inferiority, is all-encompassing shame about self. And that's what a lot of us will feel. Oh, roots of shame. There's a lot of roots of the shame. We were abandoned, neglected for being different. Bullying. You'll hear me say the word bullying a lot, right? We feared that being different would cause us to lose the love and affection from our parents and others. We were abused, physically, verbally, emotionally, psychologically, and sexually. I definitely experienced all those. Up at the age of 7, I can say I experienced all forms of those abuses. And we feared for our physical safety. We were rejected, invalidated, isolated, and we felt lonely. We were taught to live under false pretenses. Many of us have heard the concept of living a double life, right? I feel this, I'm this on the inside, but I'm living this life because that's what the public world needs to see. I'm matching my insides with other people's outsides. These types of abuses and fear help fuel the core belief that we are disgusting, flawed, unacceptable, and worst of all, unlovable. And we come to experience and live in toxic shame. And many of us are constantly in that spiral. And therefore we're profoundly wounded. So for somebody like me who is profoundly wounded, I get in a relationship with a man who's profoundly wounded. It's hard, right? 2 wounded birds with broken wings. It's really hard to relate. Thank God for recovery. I heal myself, he heals himself, and we help each other in our healing. We don't take responsibility for others' healing, we support the healing. Just a little note on shame versus guilt. Sometimes people get confused on this. Guilt is about what I do, shame is what I am, right? I feel guilty about doing something. Healthy guilt says that I take action. I did something wrong, I want to correct it, I acknowledge the mistake and fix it, and it will dissipate. Shame is about who I am, right? It's so internalized, it's all encompassing. And we have to learn it's okay to be who I am. And that's a hard thing. Talk a little bit about a healthy shame cycle. Anybody heard of this term? Apparently there is one. Healthy shame cycle? Do tell me more. Apparently I'm not the only one that experiences shame. So first of all, we have a broken social bond. And the event occurs, right? Somebody says something and does something. I go into a negative evaluation. Oh, I'm a horrible person. I am this, I am that. And I sit in it, and then I feel shame. I'm mortified. I want to be invisible. I want to hide. I want to run. Healthy response is, oh, I need to parent that, right? Okay, little boy, I got you. You're okay. You're a good boy, whatever. I acknowledge it. And in most cases, we're able to discharge it. That's a healthy way. Because the fact is, we all will experience shame like one another. That's not a bad thing. It's how we deal with it. The unhealthy shame cycle is that we have the broken social bond. Somebody says or does something. I go into that negative evaluation. And I'm a horrible, worthless person. I feel this intense shame, but then I avoid it. I try to stuff it. I drink it, whatever, right? And then we can move into something that's called compounded shame. Right? So something happens that creates this trigger of shame in me, and I act out in a way through avoidance and trying to avoid my shame, in which I do something shameful. And very often that can be anger, right? Lash out. Person's clueless. I'm going through a shame spiral. It could have been minute what happened, but it's mine. And I attack, I rage, what have you. Anybody experience that? Or maybe some other dysfunctional behavior happens that makes me feel wrong. I accidentally bump water on somebody, or what have you. Do something that's mean. And it'll create shame feelings. It'll be a shameful experience. And ultimately there'll be anger. Anger at that person, anger at me, anger at what I did, what was done. Now we're going to talk about rage and anger. The opposites are all just falling nicely together. Anger is a response to when we experience pain, fear, sadness, frustration, and guilt. It is an uncomfortable and emotional response to provocation. Even though anger is listed as a primary emotion, it typically isn't the first emotion. Does that make sense? Usually there's something under it first, right? That we learn, a lot of us that have done our therapy in that. It's not the primary emotion. So what I've always learned is when I'm angry, what's under that? It could be 3, 4 levels above the emotion chain and have to get through that. Anger is a conscious reaction to feeling in response to something tangible. Tangible, that's important, right? Tangible, not made up. About something in the real world. Anger is utilized to protect and assert ourselves. Might be boundary work. Anger tends to dissipate after an apology or recognize the source of the anger. And anger is usually controllable and can be a healthy emotion. In our couples program, one of the things that we learn is that healthy anger is one of the most valuable expressions we can do in coupleship. That blew my mind. I had to read that. I don't know how many times. I thought it was a misprint. I was going to call RCA and complain. But I say I want to mention something. Our couples program endorses CoDA. We specifically state, they don't say if you may be a codependent, they say you are codependent. We recommend you get, codependency help and recovery. Therefore, that's one of the reasons why I'm here. So I love that about my RCA program. Okay, rage. Rage stems from extreme anger and is in response to when we perceive rejection or invalidation. In the case of rage, when we experience rejection, it may be accompanied by shame of an earlier memory or traumatic event, or the shame desire to make a connection. When those memories merge with shame experiences, the reaction can be violent. And rage usually dissipates only when the threat is removed or the rager is incapacitated. I mean, literally incapacitated. I've seen it. And rage is uncontrollable. Rage experienced one is unable to regulate emotions. A rager is abusive. Bottom line. For me, anybody that's in a rage state, that's abuse. My grandfather and my father I don't think there was anybody that raged better than those 2 men in my life. And it was the scariest thing for this little boy to grow up. Until I got into therapy, I had to realize he rarely was angry at me. He was raging mostly at my mom and other family members. As a little boy, little kids take it on. Our little narcissist child is like, it's all about me, right? What did I do wrong? I need to be there. But it's still really, really hard. And my dad was really one of those people. He had to be removed from restaurants because of his rage. And that's usually where he would have rage attacks because of the issues around his body. Talk a little bit about body language. So anger's body language, wide-eyed and mouth. Right? They use their hands to enforce their message, and they tend to approach the source of anger in a correct and assertive way, not a threatening it. Rage's body language is closed eyes, distorted face, expressions of a pending physical attack. They're coming after me. Uncontrollable hands and arms, and they tend to approach the source in a threatening stance. It's control. And now this, we're going to blend shame and anger. They belong hand in hand. Uninhibited emotions are those feelings we successfully avoid. Therefore, we don't feel them. We learn to avoid shame, so we often do not experience shame in its full intensity. Apparently, suppressing shame isn't a healthy thing. And we learn to orchestrate the world around us, or I like to say, we decorate the world around us. I want you to see this. It's perfect. I look great. I'm happy. I'm fine. I'm well adjusted. But don't see this. Don't see what's inside of this. I'd be vulnerable. And motivation is self-loathing. And this fear that if you see the real me, you will not accept and love me. You'll see that I'm inferior, flawed, and disgusted, and any other adjective you can think of. Because we do not believe in ourselves, we seek validation from the world around us. One of the things that I learned is I became a validation junkie. Anything to get that acknowledgement, that like, that love, the acceptance, right? I would do anything for that. To press the cycle of shame avoidance and attempt to control rage. Some of the characteristics people may say, because not everybody is an external rager. I was an internal rager. Because I saw my grandfather and father say, I will never be like them. It just meant I seethed inside. And boy, it's just as bad on the body, right? Internal rage is horrible. And some characteristics we'll see some people is, sharp tongue, bitchy humor, explosive ragers, self-righteous fury, volatile, unapproachable, and overly sarcastic. Sarcasm is Greek word, and it means spiking flesh. That doesn't sound very nice. I come up from a family of origin that does a lot of sarcasm. Oh, but it's funny. Well, being on the spectrum, I couldn't interpret. I'm a logic person. I have to figure out what it means. and I hear sarcasm, and I'm spinning my wheels trying to understand the message. And then my family, of course, would make fun for me not getting that. And then I would give them, oh, we're just being funny. And I've had to teach my mother when she does that around me, I don't respond, or I'll say, oh, sounds like sarcasm. Are you in pain? Go get help. All right. All of this leads to trauma. Right? All this now comes to it. When we have experiences or situations that are emotionally painful and distressing, and that's overwhelm our ability to cope, leaving us powerless, that is trauma. Trauma has sometimes been defined in reference to circumstances that are outside of the realm of normal experience. However, for some of us, trauma can occur frequently and becomes part of our human existence. Let me get to where I'm at on this. Right. PTSD. I definitely developed PTSD, which the Psychiatric Association or the American Psychiatric Association states that a person must have experienced or witnessed an event or events that involve actual or threatening death or serious injury, or a threat to the physical integrity of self or others, at which involve fear, hopelessness, and horror. Well, when the little kids are, chasing you home, beating you up, I actually was threatened. Of course, I developed PTSD, right? One of the things I learned early on is I would wait after the school bell rang at the end of the day. I would wait for the kids to leave. If I mean I had to wait for an hour, I would. I would avoid the school bus. I'd walk home. I would take different routes. Sometimes the kids would figure out which route I was going. It was insane. Hijack brain. So Heidi did a really good workshop on triggers. And this is a really important thing because PTSD is also about trigger management. So when we experience strong emotional anger, anxiety, fear, or even extreme excitement, the rational brain, prefrontal cortex, is bypassed and signals are sent straight to the emotional brain, the amygdala. So we know our stimuli, except for smell, all the other stimuli come through our thalamus. And our prefrontal cortex should at some point be acknowledged and have a little handshake there. But what happens in the hijack brain, or also referred to as a traumatized brain, the amygdala is too strong. It's hyperactivated, right? Events occur repetitive so much that the amygdala just jumps on to take action. So the problem with that is the hippocampus, which is the area that controls understanding time, people, and that, doesn't know what's ready. So when it's triggered, we're actually thrown back to an event that occurred long ago, right? So then the cortical amygdala extracts inputs. So it detects threats. Well, that would be the bulk, right? It triggers a body response: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Did everybody know that there's a fourth one? Oh, joy. It's not just the three, there's actually four. Fawn. I was more of the fawner. Fawner is about submitting, right? Fawning is submitting. So instead of and this is where the people pleasing thing come in, right? Oh, I'm going to be bullied. Just like, submit. As is a freezing thing, yes, but it's also takes some action to submit. Fear conditioning. I was conditioned for fear. Hypervigilant, always looking for it. Who's going to attack me? Who's going to say something wrong, right? And like I shared, exiting the school after classes, getting on the bus, processing positive emotions. This was a confusing thing for me. I hear family members talk about positive memories from childhood. Before I got in recovery and did a lot of my PIT and some other work that I had to do, like regression therapy that I had to do around trauma, anytime somebody brought up, oh, do you remember when? I would get so angry. And I couldn't figure out why I was angry. I was so mad. Part of it, I was sad and grieving that I couldn't remember something positive happened. Problem with being so traumatized is the trauma is at the top. When I started, I had to have lots of years of recovery before positive memory started. And now when I hear family members talk about something like that, oh, and what I've also learned, if I don't remember, say, oh, tell me more. I don't quite remember. I'd like to hear. In the past, I just thought anyway. And I'm sure there was a shame response there too. Another one is how memories are encoded. So we know that in trauma, if you think about it, you have a video and you have an audio. And trauma is not stored in this nice, perfectly sequenced, movie that plays. It's like somebody smashes the video in pieces and somebody has the audio off track. That's why when we have these memory and flashbacks, they don't quite make sense and they feel distorted. So unfortunately, those of us who do trauma work, we get to repair that bad film and audio and put it together, and it sucks. So it was important to do. Do I have some other notes on this year on that? I think I did real quick. Oh, this one on the Voca Center, which handles speech. So very often when I'm triggered, one of the things I learned was, how old am I? Right? When I'm in that triggered state, how old am I? Because all my trauma works at, okay, this incident happened, and my 6-year-old, or my nonverbal, my verbal, my the teenager. Well, there's another complication to the verbal nonverbal, and that's the Voca Center. Those of us who have been traumatized so much we have what's called a I think it's the term again, sorry. Underactive voca. So we're not able to vocalize what's going on for us. But it's not necessarily what age we are. But the traumatized brain has a lot of impact on this, I guess, is my point with that. And then I'm going to finish on dealing with emotional triggers. Not a whole lot. I know Heidi did a wonderful job in her workshop on emotional triggers. So when an emotional trigger happens, it does not make sense in the context of the situation or present circumstances. However, emotional triggers do make sense when we add in the past. It is in our past that we must look to uncover the meaning in the trigger in order to take away its power over us. So we have this tiny little event, this 1 cent event, and we have a $10 reaction. Well, that $10 reaction is about a $10 event that happened 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, right? So the past is key. When unsettling feelings connected with the past are triggered, the child within often reacts impulsively, immaturely, or aggressively. Our unresolved issues erupt as overwhelming thoughts and or feelings that drive our behavior often leave us wondering, why did I act like that, or where did that come from? The solution lies not with trying to eradicate the child within, but by embracing its often unpredictable, sometimes unwelcome part of ourselves. All right, now we're moving into solution. Enough of that. So let's move into solution. And okay, we're gonna move here. The solution, what I've done is I've broken this up, I call 9 verticals of creating a plan of recovery around bullying. And the first vertical is about breaking the silence of isolation, breaking the cycle of isolation, education, affirmations, functional boundaries, vulnerability, forgiveness, rescripting, cultivating authenticity, and action plan. That's a lot. I'm sure we could come up with many other things we could do, but these were important things that I had to work on in my own recovery. When we develop a plan, we want to ensure that it's intentional. We take it slow because trauma did not happen overnight. So recovery doesn't happen overnight. We make it progressive. We bring in little pieces and bits as we're working it, and keep it structured, because I have that structure. That's important to me. Keeps me consistent. So the first vertical is breaking the silence of isolation, and this from tools of recovery. Asking for help. Yeah, asking for help. The CoDA program suggests that we cannot recover alone. We need to make a conscious decision to seek help from our higher power and other recovering CoDA members in order to work the program. For many codependents, reaching out to others is difficult because we're always done everything ourselves. Some of us fear rejection and would rather not disclose our vulnerabilities to other people. In recovery, we learn to ask for help when needed from our higher power, sponsor, and friends. An important thing is not only ask for help, allow myself to receive it. That sometimes is the harder part. How can I do this? How can I break the cycle of isolation? Go to meetings. Oh, that sounds like a good plan. Making program calls, working the 12 steps with a sponsor, participating in text message accountability support groups, reading recovery literature, engaging in service work, participating in fellowship activities, developing a practice to connect with a higher power, attending and participating in recovery retreats, and working with their therapist as necessary. So we know shame requires 3 major things, right? Silence, secrecy, and judgment. So all these things bring the shame into the light, right? Burns it up. Next vertical is education. I need to understand the nature of my codependency, dysfunctional behaviors, and addiction, how they develop, and the impact on my physical, mental, and spiritual health. That's what we do in recovery. Develop a system of identifying and connecting with the proper support groups and other resources to provide emotional and social support to overcome these things. Then I have to learn coping skills to manage stress, anxiety, and other triggers, recognize the signs and symptoms, and developing strategies to manage my cravings, triggers, codependence, and so forth. And then I have to transform my dysfunctional behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes into functional behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes. Real easy, right? How do we do this? Again, by going to meeting, we learn from sharing and listening. We learn from doing our 12-step work, learning about the traditions and principles, reading recovery literature, doing service work, and if need be with a therapist. And so there are many more ways that we can educate ourselves in recovery. The next area, which is affirmations, stay positive. Affirmations help us attain and maintain a positive outlook and support feelings of self-worth. Some of us post them in an appropriate place, in a prominent place, such as a bathroom mirror or the dashboard of our car. We find it helpful to say them out loud every day. Affirmations expressed in the present tense are gentle reminders to remain positive. CoDA has a booklet on affirmations, blah, blah, blah. So, and this is from Tools of Recovery, and there's a booklet called Affirmations. When I got in recovery in 2008 and I heard affirmations, I about wanted to vomit, right? You gotta be kidding me. It felt artificial. It wasn't true, right? Because I'm not a good person. It was horrible. Basically, it was that artificial process that was hard. So to develop a practice of affirmations, we want to keep them short and keep them simple. We want to use present tense. We stick with I statements. We avoid negative statements. Saying I'm not a bad person is not an affirmation. Target an area that needs focus. State facts. Another thing we can do is say the affirmations out loud to the mirror. Look at ourselves in the mirror when we say the affirmation. Not easy, but it's a good tool. And be persistent. Gratitudes. Gratitude is a form of affirmation. That's a very important tool. I like that one. I learned the 90-10 rule about this. 90% of my life is pretty good, 10% where was I focused? In the 10%. I was ignoring this beautiful 90% of my life that was so awesome. I choose to live in the 90%. We're not going to do this, but this is for you. I have throughout this section here, I'm going to have suggested exercises you can look at if you want to practice some of these things. These are things I often, when I'm working with my sponsees, I have them do as part of their program of recovery. So develop an affirmation reframing the bully's message. That's a challenge, right? Write down the affirmation and say it out loud. Listen to the inner voice and be in touch with my body. Do I feel any tightness in the throat, tightness in the chest? My stomach feels squeezy, wheezy, okay? If it does, I need to repeat it. I need to write it down, I need to say it. And I repeat this over and over and over until my brain is calm and doesn't reject the message, no intrusive thoughts saying, you're useless piece of, you know what? And my body stays calm, that I'm good. Oops. So if it takes 100 times, it takes 100 times. Does that sound like an interesting exercise? Anybody heard of something doing something like this? Good. Glad to hear that. Boundaries. We love boundaries, right? Boundaries. We have physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and sexual boundaries. It is up to us to determine where those boundaries begin and end. We need to be aware of our own feelings so that we can let others know when we feel uneasy or uncomfortable. We cannot assume other people can read our minds. Very important. They can't read my minds. Setting boundaries is a skill that requires practice, but which can lead to a sense of freedom in our lives. And then there is a pamphlet on establishing boundaries and recovery. And lots of promotion here, right? Okay, so boundaries, what are they? They're protection and containment. They set limits, they define us, set expectations, show respect, and give us rules about our roles. And hopefully our roles are fluid. Our codependency, I know for me, is I'm locked in a role. I was the lost boy for so long in my life. And being a 47-year-old man when I came to recovery, that didn't work anymore. When boundaries are strong, they're also flexible, and we're able to adapt in the moment. When we have poor boundary systems, they're rigid. Therefore, they could be so rigid, there's flexibility, or they can be so flexible, like a net, things are coming back and through, but they have no power. types of boundaries. We have our intellectual boundary. It's basically with whom, where, when I share my ideas, as well as who gets access to my knowledge and my learning. Physical, with whom, when, where, how I am touched. Spiritual, with whom, how, and where I share my beliefs and practices. That was an interesting area. I'm Jewish, Russian Jew by trade, and I'm married to a Latin Roman Catholic. I had so much issues around religion abuse as a child. I got in a relation with Fabio. Religion was off limits. He wanted to go to church with me. I would get angry. Again, that anger, right? That shame. I get so angry. So I got in recovery, and that sponsor says, you need to try to go to 6 different places of religion or faith and just try them, see if anything resonates. And then that allowed to open the door. Because I always feared that he would think I'm so weird and different, right? We did our spiritual work in RCA, realized that probably 95% of our belief systems are the same. Oh, amazing. But I had a conception that, well, these Catholic, they're way out there. That's, for me, that's Bible 2.0. All right. Emotional, by whom, where, and when, and how I will be treated, how I treat myself. And sexual, with whom, where, and how I will be sexual. Do these look like intimacy types? Those of us who've done our work around intimacy, these are all also the same forms of intimacy. So, and CoDA talks about our boundary systems. We have external boundary systems that protect and contain the body and are used in physical and sexual intimacy. And we have internal boundary systems that protect and contain our mind and emotion and spirit. And there are 2 components. We have our internal talking or containment boundaries. And this is about sharing my reality in order to be known. And then my internal listening boundary, respectfully listening so that I may know others better. And a little sub note on this one, it was important for me because I was so defensive when I came to recovery. I was a shitty listener. I was a poor listener. And I learned in recovery once I was honest, and I dealt with the distress and feelings of being honest and the consequences of being honest and telling my truth. I've learned the simple rule is when I hear something, is it true? I may not like it, but is it true? If it's true, I have got to work on accepting. That's my business. I have to, it's my work. It's not on another person. I have to accept it. If it's false, what do? I need to look at my zones of intimacy. How important is it? How close is this person to me? Is this really even relevant? Let it go. If it's my most intimate person, I think we have a dialogue. Oh, great. I can use a tool and we can talk about it so I can get clarification. There may be a possibility it is true and I can't say it. And then the maybe, that gray area. Oh, I'm not sure. Well, what can I do? I can ask clarification questions, but no more than 4, right? Because then we're interrogating. And that looks like defensiveness. All right. Why do we want boundaries? I mean, I got into recovery. I'm one of these because of my autism. I am extremely rigid. It can be very, very rigid. So my boundaries were rock walls. And my husband has to remind me from time to time, you're being really rigid with your body. That means my boundaries are too strong. And because of the shame I was feeling, I didn't think I had a right to put boundaries on other people, but they had a right to have boundaries on me because I was the bad boy, right? So I had to learn start practicing boundaries with myself and others. Now it's hard. I'm grateful for it because it's one of the most significant things I've learned I can do for something called self-esteem. Believe it or not, right? It's an antidote for self-esteem, right? It's good boundary work. We assert by stating our opinions, thoughts, and feelings and needs in a respectful manner. We have the ability to say yes and no, and we're okay when others say no. You notice I didn't say yes on that one because I don't get upset when people say yes, right? I can get upset when they say no. Separate my needs, thoughts, and feelings and desires from others. Empower myself to make healthy choices and take responsibility for myself. Practice self-esteeming behaviors and self-respect. Share personal information gradually and a mutual sharing, trusting relationship. Protect physical and emotional space from invasion and intrusion. Take care of my own needs. Have equal partnership where responsibility and power are shared. And of course, this opens us up to healthy vulnerability, which is probably the next vertical. Who loves vulnerability? The definition alone is scary, right? The definition of vulnerable is not a positive thing. Susceptible or capable of being physically or emotionally wounded, susceptible to physical and emotional injury, state of being liable to succumb to manipulation, persuasion, temptation, addiction, so forth. Those don't sound like things that I want in my life, right? Oh, by the way, that's our dog, Asuka, and he's modeling for us what vulnerability looks like. That's usually him saying, I don't want to get out of bed or rub my tummy. All right, so without vulnerability, I can't experience intimacy. It's kind of a primary ingredient for healthy intimacy, right? And vulnerability requires that I have strength and courage to overcome the distress of the underlying feelings long enough to deal with them. It means I have to face my shame, I have to face my fears. So let's talk about gifts of vulnerability. Since the definition doesn't sound very pleasant, are there gifts? Maybe I can attack it from that angle. Yes, there are gifts. When I allow myself to be vulnerable with trustworthy people in a safe place, right? Always have to add that. I am being authentic, honest, and showing integrity. A huge part of my recovery is learning to find my authentic self, right? And I need vulnerability as that key. When I'm authentic, I'm open to intimacy. When I'm intimate, others see the real me and they can relate. I found out I'm not the only person who has these issues. And apparently people connect more with my human side than my perfection. I wanted them to see my perfection, right? But they connected with the human in me. And when I'm truly known, I can be loved. It's hard to love plastic, right? I can love flesh and bone. So joy and happiness come from vulnerability, and being vulnerable can lead to you get a fill in the blank. And of course, trust comes from vulnerability, right? It takes a certain amount of vulnerability in order to create trust. Honesty is a form of vulnerability. Healing comes from being vulnerable. Creativity comes from being vulnerable. And being vulnerable promotes a balance of inner well-being in life. Okay, the 12 steps to vulnerability. Develop a safe and secure environment to build trust. Be myself, let myself be seen. Let go of who I think I should be. One of the things I learned, it's not my business what other people think. That's a hard one. Because so much of my life I was worried about what other people thought. I let that go most of the time. Remember, I'm worthy of love, affection, and belonging. Remember, everyone experiences shame and fear. I am not the only one. Remember, it's okay to be imperfect. Remember, connection is why I'm here. Connection is an antidote to shame. Lean into the discomfort of life. That's what recovery work requires me to do, right? I have to lean into it so that I can move on, learn from it, and move on. Be compassionate and show empathy. Stop trying to control and predict everything. Practice gratitude and joy. Embrace vulnerability, ask for help. Take risks, put myself out there, be courageous. Next vertical is forgiveness. This is a tough area too. Forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves, consciously deciding to let go of negative feelings towards a person who has harmed us may improve our emotional, spiritual, and physical health. We get help with this by working the steps with our sponsor. So we're getting some solutions there. Apparently, if I work the steps, I am going to have a track of moving forward to being able to develop a practice of forgiveness. And our 12 and 12 workbook that we use for step study says working on forgiveness before making amends is very important. As we let go of the past, accept the truth about it, and learn about our freedom of choice in recovery today, we begin to feel a new inner peace. Sometimes this is the first experience of forgiveness. So what is forgiveness? Forgiveness, excuse me, I need some water. Forgiveness is about letting go the hope the situation could have been different. Kind of sounds like grief as well, right? Giving up the anger and resentment held for something actually done or not done. Forgiveness is a rational decision based on practicality and experience. It's an action, it is not a feeling. Forgiveness is a move to emotional reconciliation and acceptance. It's a gift to oneself. It does not necessarily signify reconciling with the person or condoning their behavior. It's about not letting them holding me emotionally hostage and giving my power to them, right?
Release the resentment.
Drop the rock. Why forgiveness? 12-step recovery teaches me that I need to let go of the past so that I can live in the present, and forgiveness of myself and others an essential component to surrender, right? I struggled with the concepts of surrender in step 2 and 3. It was too abstract. I don't do abstract well, just isn't in my neurology, my neurodivergent range, but that made sense. And I can resonate with forgiveness as a path to surrender. Okay, I'm doing it fine. Okay. This is an important area to me, so I'm going to have several example exercises you can do. Rescripting has been an important part of my recovery work around shame reduction work, shame resilience work. That was really like resilience. So from In the Moment Daily Meditation book, it says, I have choices. I don't have to live from the script where I play the victim. I can write my script in a way that is healthy for me. I am now more likely to evaluate the situation as is happening, calmly view the options available to me, and make a choice. I have the freedom to improvise. I am living the most perfect life and am capable of living. I'm happy, healthy, and making progress every day. So as far as bullying, and this is framing bullying because there's different rescripting techniques, restructuring, if you will. Rescripting is about recognizing the shame feelings experienced and carried belong to the perpetrator, right? Which in turn empowers and helps alleviate feelings of self-blame and worthiness. And some considerations we can do in this practice in a safe place is recall the specific experience that led to feelings of shame. Describe the experience in detail, including thoughts, feelings, and sensory experiences. Identify and articulate the shame that was internalized as a result of that experience. Recognize that the responsibility of the shameful experience lies with the perpetrator, not with myself. Acknowledge that shame feelings are not a reflection of my self-worth and identity, but rather a result of their behavior. And if you like, you can complete a symbolic act of returning the shame back to the perpetrator. This could be a visualization. It could be a letter, which one of the examples will be a letter to the bully. Whether this is mailed or not mailed doesn't matter. It's your personal choice. Or speaking loud to an empty chair. Many of us might have done some type of therapy where we had an avatar and we got to be with a human being. Very fun experience, not. But it was worth it. All right. So one of the exercises is called the ABC workshop. I don't know if anybody's heard of the ABCs. Probably, maybe you might have done it in your life. So even though it's called the ABCs, there's actually a D and an E. And some of the programs will actually have you go up to letter H, but we're going to focus on a simple form. So we look at the activating event. We describe something that happened to you or in the environment around you, the event, the bully event, the experience of the event, what have you. And then we describe the belief, the thought or opinion, interpretation, or the stuck point. And the stuck point is like an if-then statement that we do to ourselves. If this happens, then this always happens. And that keeps us stuck in that, right? About that activating event. And then we look at the consequence, describe the emotional or behavioral consequence because of that belief. That's the ABC part. The rescripting part is in D and E. Are my thoughts about my belief or stuck point accurate, realistic, or helpful? That means, do I have evidence about that belief, interpretation, or option? Is it true? More than likely not. And then what can I tell myself on such occasions in the future? How can I reframe the belief, interpretation, or opinion to align with my own values? This is a really good tool also with PTSD, right? We can help reprogram our brain so when these type of situations come up again, instead of going to C, we can go to E. It's a rescripting process. So that's a technique you can look at. Another technique, and this is something that I learned to do, I did this in my step 8, right? I did a letter to the bully. And this was something that was an amends to myself. So I wrote a letter to my bully. I said what behaviors I experienced from them, how the bully affected my self-esteem, my identity, my emotional development, belief systems, and so forth. how that made me feel, depressed, scared, terrified, horrified, whatever. And that I am taking back my power, knowing that I'm not the problem, they were. And if you find it helpful, explain how they were the problem. And that you are, let them know you're a child of your higher power, precious and free, and give that shame back to them, however you want to give that back to them. It was never mine to hold, it was theirs. And this got chopped up a bit. Interesting. And let them know how you're growing in recovery.
Choose your own ending.
Thank you. Choose your own ending. Yes, that's very important. Because I'm restricting, I get to choose my own ending, right? That is important. And then last exercise, this is one that I found very powerful, is connecting with the inner child timeline exercise. Remember when I did this stuff in 2009, I put a timeline around the office. And it started with the year I was born, 1966, and took out pictures that I had. And I actually did mine all the way up to recovery. But because I want to focus on inner child, do it for the first 18 to 20 years. Take pictures out that you have. And at the top of the picture, you write the year, your starting age, and then a major event. In the right-hand corner, any kind of positive memories or events in your life. In the bottom left-hand corner, any negative experiences, right? And by the way, that's the 58-year-old me looking at all of my children, my inner children. I like that visual. I'm a very visual person, so I like that, right? What was so powerful about this is that I was in so much shame that I could not acknowledge my inner child. He was the problem, right? And I had to actually go back and see him and introduce myself to him, get to know him, and understand what he went through so I could develop some empathy for myself. And also realize, holy crap, if that was my son, it's unacceptable, right? I would have been angry. I would have done something about it. And somebody else shared about all these people around us who don't support us and take care of us and step in when they should have. So I'm just going to do briefy here. Because I was adopted, I did not know there were any pictures of me before the age of 7. Because of my trauma and my mom being a therapist, she thought it would be best if we never talked about anything prior to my adoption. So anytime I try to ask questions, I got a resounding no, we're not doing that. Well, once I got in recovery and they felt safe, my parents sent me some pictures that were of me before I was adopted, along with my child custody service reports, police reports, police reports, I already said that, trial reports, court reports, all these things in black and white that solidified all the trauma that I had worked through were real. You know, all things, they weren't my imagination, and they spelled out and it validated me. It also allowed me to kind of connect. So the very first picture that I have of myself, I was 4 years old in 1970, and I was in my foster care. So here's a cute little Russian boy. And by the way, my biological mother is from Mexico. So got that going on. I was abandoned. That was my big event, right? I was abandoned at the age of 4, went through 5 foster homes. This picture at the age of 5, still in foster care. And I first saw that picture, I was so impressed and I broke down crying. And I looked at that little boy and I said, I think I see why I thought I was gay. Because I look at that little boy, I said, he's kind of gay. And by doing that in a good way, right? He's smiling. My hair was perfectly greased the way that I'm modeling on top of this old Hudson car. And it was cute. And I was able to connect with that little boy. I said, oh, you went through hell. I love you. And I have some other pictures where I was doing some pretty crazy things. I'm a 7-year-old. I had put a clip in my shirt and shoved it through here like girls would do. And I was hanging off of the trailer. I mean, could have been more whatever, right? But I looked at it and said, I think I understand why people thought I was a little different. I wasn't a kid playing football. Oh, I want to beat you up. But I was able to connect with that. Finally, I was able to connect with that little boy. I found it very healing. At 7, I was adopted by my family. My mother had been my therapist for many years. She loved me so much. The first day she started working, she told my dad, we're adopting this boy. And it took them many years to get the process through because the courts were really struggling with letting me go. They thought that my mother had abandoned me and went up to Canada before she got deported was going to come back for me. Like that would have been a good choice anyways. Stupid. So my parents ended up suing the court. Grade 1, I was 7 in the first grade entering. So I was already 1.5 to 2 years older than a lot of my classmates. but I was also the most underdeveloped physically. So I was a little kid, little squirt. It's also the first time I experienced sexualization, right? I had my first experience with sexual abuse, where an older adult thought it would be a good idea to teach me how to perform oral sex, and that carried on. So I was sexualized at a young age, and that had a huge impact on me. Just because everything sexual doesn't mean we can handle the impact, the emotional impact that carries on. Second grade, cute little Boy Scout there. That's when the bullying really took off with the gay bullying. At the age of 10 in the fourth grade, I got the little XX there, I was introduced to pornography. I had an adult male babysitter who was sexual with me and found my dad's pornography collection. From that point, I started looking at that collection a lot. So that was my introduction there. All right, at the age of 12, that little sixth grader was already becoming alcoholic. And I was in a family that, did I get in trouble for drinking? No. I remember one time I drank some expensive vermouth, I don't know what, liquor, drank the whole thing and was passed out in the hallway. My dad found me. Was he mad at me for drinking? No. He was mad at me for what? You drank my expensive liquor. Messed up priority, right? In the seventh grade, at 13, I call this child labor. Me and my cousins, they had a family business. My grandparents and parents had a family business. And we were made to go work weekends after school. I call it child labor because we weren't being paid. My grandfather was kind of mean, bossy. It was not a nice environment. And when I finally said, hey, I think we should be getting paid, they grudgingly did. But there was a problem because it was illegal for a 13-year-old to be working in Montana at that time. You had to be 16. All right, moving along here. So one of the things I love when I looked at this is I could see all the transformation. I was trying so hard to change my look every year. Maybe if I looked like this or I looked like that, people would like me, right? I could see that in my year to year. And I could also see the transformation between the 8th grade and the 9th grade. 9th grade was a huge transformational year. We finally moved to another city. I thought I had a fresh start. We moved from Helena, Montana to Billings, Montana. I had a fresh start. And I did for a little bit, until rumors of me being gay came to surface, and then the bullying got worse than ever. But my highlights is that I was a straight A student, I was in honor classes, and I was bored. So I started college in the 9th grade. And I also did something where I was a pretty good violinist. And in the 9th grade, I challenged the first chair in high school. So that really upset the seniors that 9th grader was the first chair. And then there was another girl who was also in the 9th grade, and her and I challenged each other back and forth. So we ended up being, first chair, so pissed off the seniors. But those are, for me, a proud moment, right? I achieved, and I learned to be an overachiever. In the 10th grade, 16, you can really see a transformation there. People would think I was 18. I had no trouble buying liquor. Back then, you could buy liquor at the age of 18. I became president of German club, which pissed off the seniors because this 10th grader was sitting in 12th grade German class, but I was better than him. But they realized, oh, he could help us with our homework and might actually pass this darn class. A sad event is that with all the bullying that happened, I tried to take my life for the first time. I tried to commit suicide. I drank a whole bottle of solution and a bottle of prescription pills. Didn't kill me though. I ended up throwing up and waking up the next day. That was my first attempt at suicide. And the other thing for me that came out too is the sexual addiction had really taken hold. My peers didn't like me, but I was getting a lot of attention from older men. So I learned to look cute for the older man. I was going to the gym. I was healthy. So I was getting the attention that I wanted. And I thought they loved me. I was being used, right? So that's definitely what programmed for me, is that my only value to men was my sexuality. I had nothing else to offer. My damaged self-esteem was so badly damaged that there's nothing else to give. Sex seemed okay. That was it. And that set me up. And thank God that I got in sexual recovery when I did. But it's sad to think that that happened at that young of an age. But I can understand why. And I can have empathy for that child. And I can reparent him. I got this. And then the last thing on here is in the 12th grade, I had enough. So before I went into 12th grade, took a check out of my parents' checkbook, signed up for a foreign student exchange, wrote a big ass check, and left for Germany. And come back for 18 years. My parents never said anything. I think I knew, but I was free. My first experience in Germany was so positive. I could be me. They didn't care about my sexuality. It was so much more progressive than, Montana. So I'm grateful for that. So hopefully you can kind of see how this type of an exercise would be useful. I spent a lot more time kind of explaining this. This can also be used for analyzing first relationships. It can also be used for development of dysfunctional behaviors. There's different ways that we can use these timelines.
And can you go back to the last?
Oh.
And the last picture is my favorite. The one he was kind of handsome. You might say what it's story about.
Oh. Yeah, he's talking about my 11th grade picture. Mr. Marvel Boy, yeah. It got me in a lot of trouble. It got me, I learned to get what I wanted with men, right? Bobby saw that picture and said, "Oh, your cousin's so cute." I said, that's me. No, he wouldn't believe me. He asked my mom, said, "Yeah, and by the way, you're a pedophile." I said, "He was only 17 there, but I looked older." So anyway. Okay, enough on that one. Now we're going to move into, how am I doing on time? I think okay. Cultivating authenticity. Apparently, this is important in recovery, right? So we examine our lives in detail. We must tolerate the distress. I keep saying that. We have to tolerate the distress long enough. You're getting the message there, right? Long enough to resolve it rather than escape it. We deconstruct our inauthentic life that we built around ourselves to hide our shame in true selves. We recognize that old methods of compensating for shame no longer work. We realize the only way to reduce shame is to expose oneself to it. That sounds horrible. And we can do that with connection and talking shame. Right? Recovery, I speak shame. And eventually it burns the heck out. That makes sense. Take meaningful steps to accept responsibility for my mistake. There are things that I've done that are genuinely wrong, but I'm guilty for. I need to take care of those things. Those are my responsibility. I can do something about that. Repair relationships and heal relationship trauma. Accept myself and my flaws and my strengths. I no longer hold a core belief that I am flawed and unacceptable. I changed centers around parts of my lives that were based on shame, relationships, sexual practices, material appetites, friends, lifestyles, and we allow ourselves to be ourselves. Yes. And now one of the elements that I found useful in building genuine authenticity is this idea of contentment. There are many other aspects, but this one seemed really important to me. So contentment is an important component in cultivating authenticity. This is a way that we see the good sides, enjoy the good sides, and we find ourselves, right? And there are three primary components to finding contentment. They're passion, love, and integrity. So passion is the repeated experience of joy in doing something. And each time we do that activity that brings us joy, we discover passion. So repeated joy creates passion. Not sexual passion, but passion life, hobbies, interests, what have you. What is joy? Joy is a behavior within our bodies described as painless, lightness within the body produced from pleasure and happiness. Unlike shame and sadness, joy is a fleeting emotion. Shame and sadness can last and last and last. Joy is fleeting, right? So I need to focus on how I can do that without becoming a junkie, right? But doing it in a healthy way. So I have to make myself vulnerable to joy. I have to notice when I feel joy. That's a hard one, right? Because I will forbid joy or forbid joy. I will experience forbid joy for myself because I'm not worthy of it, and repeat the behavior to create that joy. And then love. When in the presence of another person who regularly stimulates joy within us, we begin to feel love. And real love comes from enjoying another person's company, connecting emotionally, and sharing common values. And lastly, is the integrity. To integrate and join all parts of myself. That means the things that I've been avoiding, as well as the things that I want to focus on and look forward to. I have to be mindful about what I'm hiding from others. Be clear and straightforward about who I am. Express my intentions honestly. Be consistent about my behavior and character, and follow my moral compass. I do have one. I need to follow it, and not worry about other people. And think who I am is worth presenting to the world. And now the last vertical before your last exercise. And these are action plans. And action plans are frameworks from which we develop an effective approach to overcoming harmful behavioral patterns. The primary goal is to identify and manage dysfunctional codependent behaviors, character defects, and addiction-related triggers and behaviors. And examples of action plans can be prevention plans, sobriety boundary plans. Those in S fellowship might have what are called 3 circles, self-care plan, accountability action plans. These are things around travel, holidays, change of life events, a character defect action plan. And for those of us in committed relationships, like in our RC program, step 7 is all about doing our couples agreements, communication, fighting, sex, finances, children, in-laws, all that type of stuff. I like plans. Those work really well for me. It works with my brain. And one of the things I loved about all my programs when I got to 6 and 7 was the action. That really speaks to me. When I can take action and do something that better makes myself a better person, I love that. So I have an example of a character defect action plan, which is probably going to be your last exercise. But because I talk so much about shame and anger and so forth, I did mine on anger. So the defect that I had was anger. What do I want to replace that with? And in your book, I think I have more instructions on it when you do this exercise. But I want to move towards forgiveness and expressing healthy anger. And am I willing to do this? I am willing to do this. And in the middle section, I probably want to write something out, define what this behavior is or what this defect is, right? Earliest memories around it, what triggers that behavior, anything that's meaningful for me. So for anger, I have, it is a response to when I experience pain, fear, sadness, frustration, and guilt. It is an uncomfortable and emotional response to provocation, so forth. And then my action plan, what am I going to do to move from A to B? And I have things like, I want to identify. So the first thing I have to identify that I'm there, right? First thing I have to identify, I'm angry, I feel angry, I am behaving angrily or I feel anger. I have to explore my feelings. Many of us know the acronym HALT. I also have an acronym called BHALT. You know, HALT is hungry, angry, lonely, tired. BHALT is bored, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stress. The stress can be a trigger as well. Be mindful that I jump to anger naturally. I'm wired for that from childhood, right? Acknowledge that. Boundary work. I need to have good boundaries for myself and others. That's the way that I can manage that. Have compassion for myself and for others. Work on my relational communication techniques. It's okay to be angry, but how do I communicate that? If I feel out of control, especially if I feel like I'm nonverbal, that's probably the sign that I need timeout. And I can ask for timeout. Because I'm in a relationship, I also let the person know when I would come back and finish. And then give myself permission to be angry. Right? There's nothing wrong with being angry. It's what I do with it. One of the acronyms I like about that I learned in recovery is being sober. And this isn't just being sober from alcohol. Sober is I stop, I observe, I breathe, expand my awareness. Because remember, I shared that when we stop breathing and our cortisol goes up, our IQ drops. And when our IQ drops, we say stupid shit, right? That there is biology behind it. There truly is biology. When we stop breathing, our IQ literally drops 10. And we say stupid shit. So we want to breathe to bring our IQ up so we can be a functioning adult. Makes complete sense. And then we respond. And probably a 180 from how we initially want to respond, right? And finally, reach out if to sponsor accountability partner and review my anger before I take action. So now, your final exercise is you're going to identify a characteristic that you worked on in exercise 2, and you're going to explore the exact nature. So step 4, whether we're resentments, harms, fears, codependent patterns, that's great, but there's something under it, right? The exact nature of the wrong. And as I shared, the exact nature of my wrong was the anger. So I focused on that. So you will get to finish your own action plan. How does that sound? Thank you all. We're going to wrap this up. Thank you for your courage to be here because this is not a light topic. So we talked about bullying and its various forms, the impact that it's had on our emotional well-being and character defects and dysfunctional behaviors, and about 9 action items we can do to overcome the effects of bullying, put the bullying in place. take our lives back, our dignity back, because we deserve this. Some other thoughts I'd like to leave with, because we don't have so much time today, I'd like those to consider this, and this could be things you could think about yourself, is have you ever bullied? Behaviors learn. Something is gifted to me, I will be gifted to others, and it can look very different. And the other one is, how do I show up for somebody else who's been bullied or is experiencing my progression? And those are two very different things in how we show up in those situations. So that's something to consider. And where are you on your journey? I'm grateful where I am. I know I have a lot more work to do, and the road never ends. I'm going to stay on it. So with that, thank you.